The following program is a production of Pioneer Public Television.
Hello and welcome to Compass, a new production from Pioneer Public Television. I'm Les Heen, your host for Compass. This is a weekly discussion of public policy and important issues facing our viewing area. This week we'll discuss how business policy all across the Midwest is changing when it has to deal with aging in the workforce. We'll have representatives from the Department of Employment and Economic Development and the Southwest Minnesota Private Industry Council, and we'll touch on what businesses can do to prepare and what workers in the workforce might do to compete in a changing atmosphere. First, here's a report from Pioneer's Laura K. Prosser.
Pioneer got the opportunity to attend Southwest Initiative Foundation's Regional Workforce Summit last October. There, Sarah Sladek gave a speech on the changing age demographic in the workforce. Here are some of her key points.
We know we're at the end of an era for three key reasons. The first one is a declining economy. We can point to our most recent recession as being the worst our country has seen in 70 years, but we actually haven't had a stable economy since the dot-com bubble burst. And that changes consumerism, and it changes employee expectations, especially for the generation that's come of age during this recession. The second reason we know we're at the end of work as we know it is because of rapidly changing technology. Do you know there's been more technology developed in the last 5 years than in the last 50? We never really stopped to think about that, but that is dramatic, unprecedented change. That's changing everything about the way we live, work, and do business. And the third reason we know we're at the end of work as we know it is the demographic shift, which we're going to delve into in greater detail today. Now, this is pretty phenomenal. As of May 2015, this year, the millennials became the majority of the workforce. And baby boomers have been the majority of the workforce since 1980, for 34 years. So right now, every major industry, really with the exception of technology, is largely led, managed, and supported by the baby boomer generation. But as of this year, it's now going to be the millennials. And to put that into perspective, the millennials, also known as Generation Y, this year turns between the ages of 20 and 33. So we have a very young demographic coming up to be the majority. So as we look at this quote from Steve Jobs, I absolutely love this. It says, "There's nothing in companies as blinding as a strategy and approach, a product line that has worked before." And rather, he always inspired his team with this question: what can we do that's a generation better? Not a generation behind, but a generation better. And we're spending so much more time concerned about the departures in our communities, the departures in our industry. Oh my gosh, we're going to lose that baby boomer talent. And as important as that talent is, it is more important right now to pass along those critical skills and knowledge and build a talent pipeline. And to think about recruiting, retaining, and engaging the future. If I said to you, okay, go back to the office, you've got 30 days. Do something to dramatically improve the employee experience, especially for your younger generations. What would you do? What can a company like ours do to engage you and your peers? What is it that you're really challenged with? What is it that can make our community more appealing? Really asking those questions and being engaged in dialogue with young talent. Very, very important. Now, I hope I've impressed upon you the importance to prioritize emerging talent. Not current, but emerging. And a piece of that is that you will need to prepare for diversity. We are not only on the brink of a generational shift, but also a gender shift. In the past 2 years, there's been more women than men pursuing advanced degrees, and 30% of Generation Y is non-Caucasian. It's expected by 2050, in the United States, Caucasians will be the minority. So we've got to start thinking about diversity. We have to really think about collaboration, not silos, not titles, but teams. Remembering that the generation that's now the majority of the workforce has always known collaboration, from sports, organized sports and activities, to doing things in groups, and that idea of connectivity. We are going to need to be very open to innovation, doing things differently, migrating from what is known to radically new and innovative ideas, because now our economy is fueled by innovation, technology, and knowledge. And we have a younger generation that's been exposed to many very influential leaders that have thrived through innovation and not always known the answers, but rather set out to create solutions. We will need to foster an entrepreneurial environment. This younger generation, if they're constantly wanting to learn and be challenged, we not only have to provide flexible work environments and hours, we also have to be willing to let them spearhead tasks, try new things, and rise up to meet certain challenges. We will need to obviously provide skills training, and we'll need to start younger than ever. We will need to practice shared leadership. You know, for the first time in history, every generation has something to learn and something to teach. That's never happened before. And yet, many of our leadership teams are pretty homogeneous. They're groups of leaders with the same amount of experience, same backgrounds and skills. We have to, again, think about collaboration and teamwork. In the future, the workforce is driven by relationships, not companies, not legacies, not brands, but by people.
Now, to talk about the regional efforts that are working to understand the aging workforce challenge, we have with us Cameron Macht from the Department of Employment and Economic Development. He's a research analyst for Southwest Minnesota. And we have from the Southwest Minnesota Private Industry Council Planning and Coordinator Carol Dombeck. So, Carol and Cameron, thanks for joining us. Aging in the workforce. We hear a lot about it. People are talking about it and concerned about it. But, what are you seeing in this region? And Cameron, I'll start with you about how employers that you work with on a daily basis are dealing with this. And I should add, your office is in Willmar, right?
That is correct.
So you're talking about central Minnesota here in your work area.
Yep. Well, actually, we cover the entire state with labor market information. And we're seeing a huge shift in the age of the labor force across the state, but it's particularly noticeable in southwest Minnesota. There's a higher percentage of workers here that are 55 and older, and if you break down the labor force by age group, you'll see that there's been a tremendous shift in this region, particularly from those workers that are 25 to 54 years of age into the older age groups, 55 and above.
Okay. And Carol, of course, your office is in Montevideo, but the Southwest Minnesota Private Industry Council also deals with a fairly large area. What are you seeing in your work?
The 14-county area of Southwest Minnesota, the one that Cameron was just referring to. Yeah. And basically we see the same thing. The workforce is increasingly aging. We have larger numbers of older workers. We have fewer younger workers coming in to replace those workers that are retiring or getting close to retirement. So there's that combined with an largely increasing population also of new immigrants and increasing ethnic diversity within the region as well.
And in many cases, that ethnic diversity, more pronounced in sort of a younger demographic?
That's correct.
So we're seeing, we are seeing younger workers, but they're younger workers that come from a very different background, very different training, level of abilities, all those sorts of things.
Correct.
So Cameron, from a state perspective or regional perspective, what are businesses doing right now to sort of address where they go on this? What's happening?
We hear from a lot of employers that it's a struggle to find qualified workers, and so there's a lot of different methods that they can use to try and attract new workers. One way certainly is the recruitment strategies that they're using. So, above and beyond maybe just using a newspaper ad, a lot of them are turning to social media or to other online job banks like the state's job bank or Indeed or Craigslist or any of those other possibilities. They're also working on retaining workforce longer. So existing workers, either helping them with internal training or maybe trying to figure out more flexible schedules so that they can stay on even after they reach the traditional retirement age. Sometimes they're maybe changing the requirements of the job so they can reach out to a wider group of people than maybe would have originally responded to their ad. And then also, to Carol's point, there's increasing diversity within the region, and so maybe they're aiming at different communities that they haven't reached out to in the past.
Sure. And Carol, I know for the Private Industry Council perspective, I know you've been trying to do more outreach, right, to kind of let people know that employers have options or that workers have options, right?
That's correct. We focus on outreach as well as additional training. We see employers that are more willing to bring in new people and provide on-the-job training, bring in workers that maybe don't have the experience level they were looking at in the past, but have the potential. So they're willing to train them on the job, again, to try to counteract that lowering population of workers that are available in the area. We're also doing outreach, trying to increase awareness of Southwest Minnesota to maybe the metropolitan areas for people that are looking for a change of geography, a change of region, trying to show them what we have to offer in our area.
And I expect some of this, too, is also, for example, as you see regional shifts that people here might not think about, those are changes. For example, when the oil boom really hit in North Dakota, I suppose those kinds of things I've heard from some employers, caused changes for them because they saw people, fewer applications, they saw those kinds of changes. So is some of this sort of an ebb and flow, as there are big regional changes as well? Have we seen some of that?
It's probably less of an ebb and flow at this point. It's more of a long-term trend. We're going to see pretty tight labor markets in this region moving forward, especially as the population continues to age.
Yeah. And so as part of that, some of the solutions to that, let's talk about millennials for a minute, because of course there's a lot of national press on how millennials in the workforce are different and how they're approaching things. What are some employers that you're talking about? How are they reaching out or trying to figure out things with the millennials in the workforce? Any changes there? Cameron?
Sure. We do see maybe a higher use of social media to present job opportunities or even to market the region as a whole as a great place to live and to work. I think that maybe there is some more flexibility in terms of trying to grab workers that have skills and have education. The millennials are probably the most well-educated, at least in terms of attending college and having associate's or bachelor's degrees. They're probably the most educated generation that we have, but maybe the education that they got doesn't always align perfectly with what skills employers are looking for. And so maybe to Carol's point, if they're willing to bring them in and do some internal training to help get them up to speed on what the employer is looking for, that's a great way to try and integrate those workers into the labor force.
So, Carol, does this mean kind of a succession plan for some of these kind of businesses, and they have to kind of figure out that piece?
And businesses are looking at that, and I think businesses are struggling with succession planning. We keep on hearing that over and over again. How do I work? How do I take all the skills and all the knowledge that is present in my older workforce, and how do I pass that down to the new and the emerging workforce? So that's a huge issue, and I'm not sure we have any easy answers to that.
Are some answers starting to emerge, though? As you're working, are people sort of, trying this and just trying stuff to see what works?
To a certain extent, and I can't think of any specific examples off the top of my head. I know even within our own organization, it's one of the issues that we've looked at. So we're talking about, how do we take some of our younger employees and how do we start grooming them for some of the more leadership positions as we're looking at the leaders in our organization looking toward retirement.
Yeah. I mean, Cameron, I know you've looked at, you've been looking at research about, where this is going, and as you said, it's not an ebb and flow, it's more of a long-term trend. So as you've looked at the research over the last couple of years, let's say, what are the things that might be surprising about where we're going?
I think that people might be surprised to see that the number of teenage and entry-level workers really is going to stay pretty stable within the region. I think sometimes the perception is that all of the young people are leaving. That isn't always the case. Certainly some are, but also some are staying and some are coming back. Ben Winchester's research is a great example of that, the brain gain that a lot of these rural areas have had. I think, anecdotally what we've heard, some employers are just becoming much more competitive in trying to keep those workers. And so, some of the opportunities that they're offering, like, having older workers as they transition out, they can stay on at whatever hours they want, whatever type of level of benefits that they have, and maybe at the pay scale that they had when they transitioned out in order to keep them in the area, because that knowledge transfer is a really big deal. Sure.
And we should mention that, for the benefit of the audience, Ben Winchester is a researcher, demographer, University of Minnesota Extension Service, and so he's been looking at these rural things for quite a while. So, yep. I know that he's been doing some webinars and some interesting things. So, yep. Carol, from your perspective?
Again, we see some of those very similar things, especially with the transition of the older workers. We do see employers that are starting to make modifications within their schedule to be able to adapt the needs of a person that's maybe looking at transitioning out. So we have seen some of that, and as I mentioned earlier, some of the additional added training with the younger population with some of the newer employees coming in.
Yeah. And more flexibility.
More flexibility.
So the employer making things more flexible for the workers so that if they want to stay on the job a little bit longer, they can. If they want to commute less often, they can. Maybe they're going to a flexible schedule, working, 1 day a week from home, or those kinds of things.
Yes, some of the remote workplace issues, we're seeing some of that as well.
Yeah, which of course tends to work better in white-collar sort of occupations than it does in traditional manufacturing. You have to be on site. Let's talk for a little bit about the difference between 2-year and 4-year education, because this is something where you may hear a trend for a while. And lately, it seems like we've been hearing a lot of people saying, take a more serious look at technical education, because not everybody needs a 4-year degree. At the same time, we have companies dealing with a lot of information technology, or people who need companies where you need people with writing skills and those 4-year degrees. And so there seems to be a tug and pull in the workforce right now about what's needed and where we go. So, Carol, I'll start with you on this. What are you seeing?
One of the things that we're really seeing more and more of is a focus on what we call the career pathway system, where a person can start a job or a career at an entry-level position and continue to learn on the job, take steps, take classes that will keep them progressing not only within the job but within the educational format as well. So a person could start out as an entry-level, for example, in the healthcare field, start out as a CNA, move into TMA, move into LPN or RN or radiology technician, move into even in the medical field, higher up. So taking it more into steps, bits and pieces, especially for a person that can't necessarily take the time out to say, okay, I can dedicate 4 to 6 to 8 years to education. That's not always viable.
So a stepped approach.
A stepped approach, exactly.
So they can get in, and then with the expectation that they'll need to keep doing training and additional certification indefinitely.
Correct. And not only through schools, but through the employer. And usually it's through a combination of the employer and technical colleges, community colleges, 4-year degrees.
And of course, when they go down that path, the critical thing for many of them is the transferability of credits.
Yes.
Making sure that as they start out, so they don't end up losing time as they go from this degree program to the next degree program to the degree program after that, and that there's a fluid transfer arrangement that works for them. Because, of course, losing credits is enormously frustrating.
Absolutely. Yeah, and that's why we really look at it as a career pathway approach, a stepped approach, and it's combined and coordinated.
Yeah. Cameron, I know during the break you and I talked about some of these same issues about this. For a while we heard 4-year and then we heard 2-year. What sort of things are you seeing?
The alignment of workforce and education is a really complicated issue, and so both of those pieces can be really good advice depending on the student. A two-year degree can be a great choice and can get them into a very profitable career, or maybe a 4-year is a better match for what their skills are. One of the challenges that we have is businesses will say, this is the set of skills that we require, and then educational institutions will say, well, this is what we train people for, and then students also have to be interested in those programs. And so during the recovery from the recession, there were programs at a lot of the technical schools that would line up with what employers were asking for, but you couldn't find enough students who were interested in those programs because they had just seen how some of those were affected during the recession. And so, there's a lot of moving parts that are happening in that discussion. And so one of the things that the Private Industry Council is really good at is helping students understand the career planning process, and job seekers, not just traditional high school students, but at any point along the spectrum, is to understand, here's how you can build a career, and here's the type of training or education that you might need in order to be successful in that career. And then again, always trying to align that with what business needs are.
Right, and I would think that would be a very difficult thing for a lot of people to sort of plan out and think through, particularly if you're 18 or 20 or 22, because part of this is not just, oh, there seems to be a lot of jobs there now, but then saying, well, what's the job market likely to be in 2 years? Or 4 years, or 6, and a traditional mindset for many people was, get a degree in this field, stick with it. And that may not be the reality for many of them anymore.
That's
Carol?
correct. And the other thing I was going to add to what Cameron just said is it's so important for people to even know what their options are. You talk about career counseling, you talk about vocational assessment. How do I know? How do I even know that these jobs exist? If I don't have a family or friend or relative that worked in this field, how do I even know about that? So it's that increasing awareness, and not only amongst the high school students and the young students, but among adults as well.
Sure, because I know one of the things I ran across a while back was the percentage of high school counselors in Minnesota, or compared to student numbers. Talk about that a little bit, Carol, because I know that came out during a break.
Yes, I think Minnesota has one of the lowest proportion of, or maybe it's the highest, but the percentage of high school students to high school counselors in the country.
So, in other words, a student to counselor ratio.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. It's like
I believe
49th out of 50. It's very, very low. We don't have the counselors to be able to provide that type of information to the students.
And so and then as those students get older, they may find some of the same sorts of challenges in saying, who do I go to find out what's the next career path and where do I go? And then having the employers, of course, who are very busy, not necessarily being able to spend the time going into those various, student groups and saying, well, here's what we do and here's what it is. Correct. So is it a problem with bringing all those pieces together?
Well, and that's part of what the Private Industry Council does through our youth counselors, et cetera. We spend a lot of time in the schools just really trying to increase that awareness. Obviously, though, we have short staff and we have huge numbers of schools throughout the region, but we do what we can, again, to try to help increase that awareness and try to work with the schools.
Sure, because I expect what you see in a lot of our communities is you may have students who, have spent their whole life in the community, but they may drive by or ride by, given business for their whole lives and not understanding what goes on behind that front door.
Sure. Absolutely.
Yeah. Cameron, as we talk about workforce and changes, demographic research, I know there's been a lot of research and you'd mentioned Ben Winchester earlier, but let's go talk about that, about some of the disparities or some of the changes that we're seeing in the workforce, because people are often surprised by that. But if we look forward a little bit into the workforce, in addition to there not being or there being a fairly stable number of people in those teenage ranks now, what is it going to be like, do you think, for them as they move into the workforce? Because the millennials are different. So what's the workforce of the future going to look like, do you think, for a lot of those people? Any thoughts?
Well, the workforce of the future is going to be older, especially in this region. In fact, if you look, we do, the State Demographic Center does population projections. If you apply current labor force participation rates by age group to those population projections, this region is expected to see a slight decline in the overall size of the labor force moving forward. And the only areas where we're expecting to see a lot of growth is in that group that's 65 years and over. And so employers who are planning for, what is my workforce going to look like, they're going to have to start looking at retaining some of those older workers. The other areas that we might see some growth is in workers of a different race or a different origin, so Black or African American, Asian, American Indian, Hispanic or Latino, and they do, as you were noting earlier, they tend to be younger and more likely to be active in the labor force and then have a longer career in front of them than the older workers who are getting closer to that retirement age would be.
And I imagine the other piece that has to come in that is also then more people moving into the area as well, to some extent, has to be in order to, with the projections, to fill the jobs that are there.
Yeah, in order to keep growing the labor force or even to increase the number of jobs within the region, you would have to have more people. Yeah, more people coming in or people staying in longer, or groups that haven't traditionally been in the labor force in as high a numbers, so people with disabilities. That certainly is a huge area for growth within the region. And so employers might have to think differently about how they make their positions available and how they are accommodating.
Yeah. We get just about a minute left. If workers want to know where to go to for more information, where can they go? Carol?
They can contact any one of the workforce centers within the region. There are workforce centers throughout the entire state. In southwest Minnesota, we have one in Marshall, one in Montevideo, and one in Worthington. So contact your local workforce center.
Yeah. Cameron?
Yeah, they can go online and register through minnesotaworks.net. If they want some more information about careers, they certainly can use iSeek, which is iSeek.org, or our website, DEED, which is mn.gov/deed/data.
Okay, great. Cameron and Carol, thank you very much for joining us on Compass.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's it for this week on Compass. Join us next week as we take a look at regional chemical dependency trends and what kind of education or treatment is out there at a county and commercial level.